All right, well, today we're back to work on the C6 competition drift car build. We are closing in on the deadline that we want to get this thing done by. We're hustling, we're tackling projects, just going as fast as we can, trying to get everything done and get this car ready. But we've had a little bit of a curveball here. So unfortunately, the AC in here kind of gave up the ghost. Now I'm going to try to fix it. I want to say it's probably just the coils need to be clean, but I got to pull it out and take it apart to do that. However, we have a perfect working shop over there with much colder AC, and it's quite hot out. This thing struggles, even leaving it on all night, it still does not get that cool in here. Whereas the shop turns into an icebox with the Mr. Cool mini splits we have in there. So what we're gonna do is kind of soft move back into the shop. Now, we can't fully move in because we're getting the floors done in there, and everything obviously has to come out to get the floors done. So that's kind of what we're waiting on before we can move in. Not to mention, the other reason we haven't moved in is we have limited time to get this car done. So we don't really have time to enjoy the process of going and setting up the shop and getting things moved in and organized and building shelves and doing all the things that need to be done to make it a fully functioning shop and get this car done in time. It's kind of one or the other. So we've just been chugging along in here. But without the AC, Florida summer, with an AC shop sitting right there, you know, the choice is we're going to have to take some time. We're going to have to move some stuff over. Now, again, we're going to need to be selective on what we move over there because everything that goes over there is going to have to come back in here or go somewhere while the floors get done. So we're at least moving the car. We're going to get it on the lift. It'll be the first time this chassis has been on the lift, and it's the first time we've had this project on the lift since it was the other car, you know, so it's been pretty much the entire build. This car has been in here on the quick jacks. So that'll be interesting to have it up on the lift, which will help with finishing out the exhaust. So that means we probably need to move the table, the welder. So this is gonna be tricky. I'm gonna go over there, start organizing what we've got so far over there, kind of clean things up. It's a bit of a mess, just stuff thrown in there right now. And then hopefully Osway will be here soon and we can start working on moving this over and all the other stuff. Right?
Every time we put it down, it's like, oh,
yeah,
wow,
good.
That engine's low. Not like,
Oh,
it's like, oh.
You're like, holy shit, this thing, wow. Oh, man. right, we got things roughly set up in here. So we put the welding table kind of here for a couple of reasons. One, I want to try out having it isolated like an island because I'm considering doing that when we actually set the shop up. So if you had a big exhaust or something, you could lay it across. I don't know how I like it so far, but I haven't used it. It's just been set here, so we'll see. But also because this is really our only workbench without moving the big heavy workbench, which is pointless, so we got to move it back in a week. So trying to keep it close, but we've set our little corner up here, and man, one, it feels really good to see the vet on the lift, and it was really cool to see it outside in the sunlight. But two, just seeing it on the lift, man, it's so wild to finally be able to look underneath this car, standing up, not rolling around on your back with low light, seeing how the exhaust turned out, and I'm pumped, man. It feels like a whole new car. It feels like I'm looking at somebody else's work, seeing it from underneath like this. So that's pretty cool. And seeing stuff / a build in the shop, like we're finally in the shop that we put so much time and effort and money into building. It's just a weird feeling. It's bittersweet because I kind of wanted to save this feeling for when we moved in and like set everything up, but we don't have time for that right now. One of those things. So we get half the feeling now, we'll get half the feeling later. But it's pretty cool to see this thing in here on the lift and see the shop. It feels like we've got so much space in comparison to what we're used to working in the garage. So yeah, anyway, I'm jibber jabbering. Now that we've got all that done, it's time to actually get to work, which was the whole plan that AC kind of ruined. So I don't know where we're gonna start today. We need to grab the whiteboard, bring it over here, and figure out what we want to work on first. But we've got just about everything we need over here. We'll have to go back and forth. Like if we need a tote of stuff, we'll just go grab it and bring it over. I figured there was no point in bringing it all over here now in case we don't need all of it. So anyway, I'm gonna get this cleaned up and then we're gonna dive into something. All right, so what we decided to do was tear apart the rear. So we need to get this firewall out. We need to trim it up a little bit more to fit it better, and then we can actually install it, finish riveting it on, seal it up with panel bond, make sure it's all good. We gotta make cover plates for here, but we wanna get this all sealed up. To seal it up, we gotta finish trimming it. To finish trimming it, we gotta take it out. To take it out, we gotta take all this stuff off. So we're gonna kill a few birds, one stone. Take all this off so that when we put it back in, we can finalize it. We need to finalize the diff and the subframe, get that all torqued to spec. We need to get our axles in, get our whole rear suspension done and finalized. The whole car right now is hand tight, more or less, literally the whole car. So we kind of got to go through front to back like we're building it again and tighten everything down, secure everything, finalize everything. So we're going to start with the firewall. So first we're going to take this apart though. So we start tearing this thing back apart. It's always painful at this stage in the build. At crunch time, you're coming up on the end to take things back apart that are in. Seeing them sitting in there, you know they're not officialized yet, but they're in there and you got to take it back apart. But the light at the end of the tunnel is once we get this firewall sealed, all this stuff can go back in for good. It can get tightened down. It can get torqued down. We can be done with this. This has been hanging over our heads for a while, so I will be really happy to have this firewall finished up. So we get all that out of the way, and then we move on to the rear suspension. So we pull the bash bar off, pull the wheels off, and start disconnecting the suspension. Now what I want to do is basically loosen everything up, anything that's hand tight, retorque the subframe down, make sure that's all good, and then we wanted to get the diff leveled out, squared up. It's roughly there, but just verify it is exactly where we want it to be, and then tighten everything down. There's a lot of hardware involved with mounting this diff, so I wanted to go through every last nut and bolt and make sure that we don't leave any loose ends or loose bolts. That'd probably be a better term. All right, so last night we got the rear end all stripped down, we got the subframe squared up, made sure everything was lined up correctly, made sure the diff was all squared up because it has a little bit of adjustment, it can move around, and finally got that all tightened down. It's been sitting in here loose. We nut and bolted the whole thing, nut and bolted the drive shaft. We're just gonna work our way from front and back with the nut and bolts as we work on things from back to front. I said front to back, didn't I? Either way, glad to have that done. Now Josue's gonna start working on the trimming of the firewall so we can get that done. In the meantime, I'm gonna start trying to finish out the back half of this exhaust. So, remember how he said earlier we're gonna have to grab totes and bring them over as we got to work? I gotta go grab the exhaust parts tote. All right, so the first thing we gotta do here, I kind of forgot about, I got my pieces ready, but we need to make a mount. Because since we have this slip joint in here, we don't really have any mount for the backpack here. So before we start adding pieces on, we need a mount to hold her in place. So just under 12 inches, 11 7/8. Perfect. Well, fortunately, part of moving into the new shop, cutting tools and all that stuff's over there, so we gotta go back over there, do some cutting. We didn't move the belt grinder either because we don't have a 240 outlet over there yet. We were waiting to install those till we figured out where we were gonna put everything. So, gotta do a little back and forth, but that's okay. Nothing we haven't done before. Alright, so since our exhaust is above the floor, we want to kick this up a little bit. Alright, back to the other shop. Do the trick. Finally bought a new bigger center punch. Pretty hyped on that. So I was happy with how our mount piece fit, all mocked up on there. I already got the rib nuts in, so we went ahead and welded it out, and it came out pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. Functionally, it works perfect being under the exhaust. The weld is really a formality. The weld is just there to keep it from bouncing up and down or shifting back and forth. So that worked out really well that we were able to do that, keep it tucked up nice and high. And you can see the rest of the exhaust from underneath on the lift. It's always such a cool sight to see an exhaust you built that's got all these little twists and curves to just perfectly fit. Very satisfying. So we moved on to actually making the rest of the exhaust now, the original plan before we got sidetracked by the fact that we needed to make a mount. And looking at it, there's no good way to get this angle that I need to get with just 45s. I'm going to need to make some pie cuts, as usual. Pie cuts make the world go round. So timing worked out pretty well because Josue had finished trimming up the rear firewall. So we had to drop the car down anyway, get that put back in so we could start tinkering with it, getting it final fit and getting it glued in. So as I went to start making my pie cuts, I've always had an issue with this saw where the work just spins around. You have to clamp it so tight you oval it to get it to stay in there. So I super glued some rubber on the jaws, and man, that worked super well. Made a huge difference, kept this thing from spinning without having to clamp it so tight. Still gotta clamp it tight, but not so insanely tight. However, my saw blade was not working that great. It was just dull. It was taking forever to cut through, and the duller it gets, the louder it screeches, and it's just all around not a good time. But we kept chugging away. We need these pie cuts if we want to perfectly fit this exhaust to this last little bit. We've got it so good all the way up to there. I want to nail it the rest of the way out, so we had to take the pie cut option, get these cut, deal with the screech, and get them cleaned up. So I cleaned up the outside on the belt grinder. That goes pretty quick, but with all the slag on the inside, man, there is just no great tool for getting this stuff off. It just eats up drum disc. It eats up little flap wheel Scotch-Brite disc you can't really get in there with. It's not a fun process, but we got it done. All right, I got all my pie cuts cleaned up as good as I was willing to get it, mainly the inside. It just eats through those drum discs and makes a mess. The thing just deteriorates right into your lungs. It's probably great for you. The problem was the blade here is struggling, man. I just got this thing not too long ago, and these are really expensive. The stainless blades, they have a higher tooth count, and it just, the duller it is, the more slag it leaves. So anyway, we got them done. Hopefully we don't need more than 10, but hopefully we need all 10, so it wasn't a waste making them. I'll use them at some point. So before we can start working on that, Josue is finishing up panel bonding in the Firewall. He got it all riveted in, and he is going through panel bonding everything now. Panel bond, if you don't know, is how these cars are pretty much put together originally, how all the fiberglass attaches. So that stuff is strong. Like when he's done with this Firewall will be one with the car. But since it's down, I am gonna turn my attention to the throttle cable. This is kind of one of the last big question marks we have, is making this work, because we have a floor mounted pedal box. We can't do it traditionally. We've got the throttle body flipped. We've got a billet intake. So there's just some odds and ends to figure out. And if we could have a working throttle pedal, I'd be real happy. So I'm gonna start working on this. Simple project, that's not that simple. So I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering, get back to it. All right over there?
Yeah.
You look frantic. I thought you were a professional panel bonder. Did you lie to me?
That doesn't mean I can't look frantic.
Did you lie on your resume?
Bro, this is like anything.
So you can't do it on you. So you lied on your resume.
No.
I want the record to state that Josue lied on his resume. With the throttle cable passed through the Firewall, it was time to try to hook it up to the intake. This is going to be our first time really committing to a throttle cable. We had tried another one, it didn't really work. Wasn't the right length, wasn't the right type, but this one seems to be right for the bracket we have on our intake. Now, this is a beautiful intake, but it comes with some sacrifices. Getting to this stuff is difficult, and getting to this throttle cable bracket, I've got to lift the intake up and thread it in from underneath. But I've got it in on the throttle body side. Now I need to get it in on the pedal box side. Now, since we're using a pedal box, we can't bulkhead this cable at the Firewall because the pedal box is on the floor. So we've got to bring the whole cable through and then make some sort of bracket to attach the cable into the cable housing, and then the cable end itself will go and attach to the pedal box bracket. So we start working on whipping up a bracket. We got it cut, we got it bent, we got our hole drilled in where the cable housing is going to go, and then we put a little slot in it so that we can slide it down in there and tighten it up. From there, we need to just make some simple mounts to mount it into the chassis and then see if it all was going to work. Now, in the meantime, while I was working on this, Josue was finishing up his panel bonding job. So panel bonding is messy. This stuff is strong. It's basically kind of like caulk. So you've got to tape things off really well. You've got to tape up all your edges unless you want just an absolute mess of this stuff going everywhere. So he did a really good job, did a very thorough tape job, took all the tape off, and we got to finally see the end product. All right, so good news is I figured out the throttle cable. It is going to work. It will work as we have it. The bracket we got from Borowski fits this adjuster on this cable. It threads in there. It's the right length. It fits through. We whipped up this little bracket here. So the cable slide in here, tighten down. This will bolt in somewhere right around here. And then on top of that, I was able to get the clevis for this pedal box onto this cable because the clevis that came with it, this one, was too small. So it's all gonna work. Now, I do have a couple qualms with it. Thing number one, with this bracket, if the cable comes loose, it can jump up out of there. So I want to make something to capture it. So we'll slide it in, we'll tighten it down, should be fine, but we'll build something over top here to keep it from jumping out. So worst case, if it comes loose, it's just loose. It doesn't come out. My other qualm is up here. So what we have this set up for is this, screw on barrel end. So we'll put this in position, we'll tighten this screw down, and that locks it on. And normally you would have this swedged on or soldered on. Well, it has to be removable for us to be able to remove the cable from the bracket to remove the intake. So we can't really swedge it on even if we had the capability, because then we wouldn't be able to remove the intake. So that's a big question mark I have in my mind. It's a failure point, right? Like having this screw on here, maybe it's fine, but for me in my head, it's a failure point. When you're building a car like this, it's all about failure points. You know, if this is a street car like the turbo truck, if that barrel came loose, the throttle stopped working, like it is what it is, you know, might have to get a tow home or something. But in a comp car, if that fails in a competition run, that means you're most likely gonna lose the battle. And you're putting a lot of time and effort into going to these competitions, you know, and you know, that's best case, you lose the battle. Worst case, you crash the car, you're full throttle on the bank and the throttle comes loose and you don't have a throttle and you go into the wall. So there's a lot of that needs to be taken into consideration when you build a car like this, and you can kind of eat yourself up over it. I mean, if you think about it, the Miata has very, very few of these considerations, and it's done us well. Even if it broke tomorrow, it has done us well. So it's a balance, but that's the biggest thing that bothers me is that screw-on barrel end. But again, with this throttle cable bracket, the only way for that to work is to have that. So I don't know. We're gonna make it work. We're gonna have a throttle cable. If we need to remake a bracket or change up this bracket and swedge on an end, or we'll get there when we get there. But first up, we need to get to a working throttle cable before we need to worry about that. So I'm gonna get this finished up. Josue got all the panel bond done. We got it sealed up. Dude, it looks great. Josue did a killer job panel bonding this thing in. This thing is one with the car now. And it seems super solid now in comparison to before. It's a solid unit. So we still need to get these cover plates on and seal those, but really happy with how it came out. Finally seeing these down bars without painter's tape on them. So yeah, anyway, I don't know what Josue is gonna work on next, but I am gonna finish this throttle cable. I wanna have a working throttle cable because we're gonna need that to set the TPS auto set and get this thing running, fired up. So you know the deal. Enough jibber jabber, let's get back to work. So I got back to work on my throttle cable bracket. So like I said, I just need to make a top for this to essentially trap the cable in there. Now there's a lot of factory cable brackets that have this. They'll have a plastic piece that clips in. We don't have the capability of making a plastic piece, so we're gonna make a metal one. So luckily I had this scrap piece that was perfect. Just drilled a couple holes in it, threw some M4 countersunk bolts in there, got them welded in so they're nice and sturdy. You don't have to hold them from the backside with an Allen wrench. We'll just be able to put nuts on the front side, tighten them down, easy peasy, making this as nice and serviceable as possible. So with those welded in, everything fits good, fits as it should. It's time to pull the pedal box out. So we've had this thing mocked up in here. It's ready to go. It's ready to bolt in. We have the under bracket assembly done and welded in, but we need to finalize everything. There's a lot of finalizing in this stage of the build. So we pull the pedal box out, drill our holes for our throttle cable bracket, get that done, and then we can finally remove this tape. It is such a satisfying feeling when you've had tape all over this car to protect things as you're taking things in and out, and you finally remove the tape and install whatever it is for the final time. So one of those things we need to do to finalize this pedal box is tighten everything down. It's just loosely put together. We needed to tighten everything and then put on all of our pedal pads, our grip tape essentially, to make sure that our feet don't slip on the pedals if we're driving in wet conditions, which we do a lot in drifting. So with the pedal box ready, we finally get to reinstall this thing, tighten it down for the final time. I'm really happy with how our under bracket came out. Makes this a piece of cake. You can pull this pedal box in like 5 minutes. So we got all that done, got the throttle cable hooked up, pedal box is done, pedal side of the throttle cable is done, so now we need to finish the intake side. Now to do that, we need to pull the intake off, which we need to do anyway because we need to finalize everything underneath. We've got this one coolant line that's been a bit of a fight to get tight. We had to get some wrenches, we had to modify them, cut them in half, but we finally got that last coolant line tight, and then we can go through and make sure that everything else was tight, and then we could final install this intake. This is a big moment. This thing's a little tricky to put on. There's just a lot of steps and a lot of things involved. There's a lot of stuff that runs underneath it and to it. So we wanted to make sure that we were 100% confident that everything underneath was good to go, tightened down, in place. Nothing was going to be added or removed before we put this thing on and finalized it. All right, the intake manifold is officially back on, torqued down. All the fuel lines are hooked up. The map sensor line is hooked up. The only thing that's not hooked up is that vacuum line to go to the fuel pressure regulator. That was a chore, man. There was some fighting and there was some fussing, unfortunately, which you know, if you've followed this build for a long time, you know our whole goal is serviceability, but this is one thing that is not super serviceable. You know, if we got to pull the intake off, it is a chore. I got the throttle cable in. I do need to shorten it up some, but I'm gonna wait on that. But we got it pretty straightened out. It's real tight with this fuel line here, but we made it work. We got a little bit of room. I am gonna for sure have to straighten out this bracket down here. I'm gonna do that. It's just rubbing on the side, and there's no way that's gonna be good long term. But other than the throttle cable, I mean, it's pretty much done and dusted, and the throttle cable's in there and it works, the pedal works. Go hit the pedal for him, Josue, hit the pedal. Hitting switches. We gotta adjust it, we gotta put it at the different spot, but look at that. Go all the way, all the way. Oh, geez. Yeah, we gotta work on that. But anyway, we got a throttle cable, we got an intake manifold that's on, all the wiring's in there, I've just got to hook it up. But pretty happy with that. Other than how difficult this thing was to get on, and that is longer than I'd like it to take, but then again, it's not often that you're pulling the intake manifold off. I can't recall a time I've ever pulled the intake manifold off the Miata aside from when I was pulling the engine out. So, you know, it's one of those things. We're trying to make every last piece serviceable, and there's just some things that aren't going to be the most serviceable. It is what it is. So I'm jibber jabbering on. Super stoked to work in the shop, man. That was a great call. I'm so glad we did that. It has been a pleasure. One, AC, ice cold. I mean, it got down to 72, 73 in here in the heat of the day, and I had to turn them way up just a little bit ago because I was getting too cold as the sun went down a little bit. So that's been awesome. The lighting, especially having light back here in the garage, we were kind of lacking back here. That's been big. And then space. That was a big thing. You know, when we took all this apart, doing it in the garage, we're kind of putting stuff in our way, and then you got to move it, and then it's in your way, and then you got to move it, and then it's in your way. To have room to just go shove it over there in the corner, all in all, stoked to be working in the shop again. Can't wait till we can finalize it, but hey, for now, it should be A1 to help us finish out this car. So I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering. I'm gonna let you guys go, get cleaned up. But yeah, so thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Hopefully maybe next episode we'll have first start for you. I don't know. We're just gonna keep chugging away. I need to finish the exhaust. We're waiting on the body panels and brake lines. We'll see, man. We'll see. So anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I will see you next time. Goodbye. Hopefully see you next time. That's your choice.